Hey guys, it's Daniel back here again, and I've been getting a couple questions asking about how to do the scene tracking like I did here in this video. You can see this was probably a year ago now that I posted this, and you can just see it's a little character guy sitting there. We'll restart that here, and you can see it kind of tracks the camera, and of course that's all superimposed, obviously, nothing real there. So I thought I'd give you guys a quick video on how to do that. How is it done? This would have been done with an earlier version of Blender, so we're going to update it a little bit to, let's see, what version are we running here? 2.76. So go ahead and follow along and I'll show you how we do this, alright? So the first thing you're going to need is a video to play. This would just be a video of something, of a location that you're wanting to superimpose something on. In this case, we're going to be focusing on something pretty small scale, and I'll show you how to do that here. So the first thing we're going to do is leave the default scene the way it is. That's just fine. But up here where it says default, we're going to go down to motion tracking. And that's just going to set up our screen in a way that makes sense for motion tracking. You could do this all just by going in, like if you're still on default. You could just move this to... where are we at? Movie clip editor. Yep, and you can do it right there if you want the full screen. But I like actually having a dedicated setup here. So go to motion tracking. Now we're going to need to import our video that we're going to be tracking with. So we're going to go ahead and click open and navigate to wherever we have it. In this case, it's just right here on my desktop. Alright, you can see my lovely desk there with my box of Pocky, microphone, all that good stuff. And you notice these little white dots on the desk. We're going to be using those as tracker points. And the reason that that's important is the engine that goes through and does all the mathematics to figure out the location of everything needs to have multiple track points. You need to have as many as you can get, really. In this case, we'll be using, let's see, 2, 4, 6, we'll be using 8 or so, which will give us a fairly good track. Not perfect, but good enough. So once you've got this in here, we're going to go ahead and start to cache the video, okay? So what Blender will do is it will actually store the video in your system RAM, which makes it quicker for the solving to happen, for it to solve through what it needs to. So imagine the process that the Blender goes through here is it looks for a dot like this, let's say, and marks its position. Then it loads the next frame and finds it, see if it's still there. Loads the next frame, does the next thing. Loads the next frame, does the next system. So it does that over and over and over again. Well, if you've already loaded the frames up, it just becomes a lot quicker. Well, how do you load the frames? How do you cache the frames? It's actually really easy. Just hit Alt-A, and you'll see how this discolors here. See how it changes colors on the left side of our icon, of our marker there? See how it's a lighter blue and then a darker blue. The darker blue means that it's not cached yet. The lighter blue means it is cached. And the total length, total duration of your video is spanning here. So if we let this go for a little bit, we're going to notice something here pretty quick. Watch this tail end here. Oh, there we go. Okay, so now this is the maximum that Blender is allowed to use, okay? So if you have a system like mine that has more than a couple gigs of RAM, you're going to want to up that. Right now I think it's only allowed to use 1 gig of RAM as its maximum, and we can up that quite a bit depending on your system. So the way we do that, go to File, User Preferences, System, scroll all the way down, and here we have the memory cache limit, okay? You could put that up to whatever you want. In my case, I'm going to put up to 2048, so 2 gigs, I think is what that would be. We'll save that. And now let's play from the beginning. You notice we're able to cache all the way up to there. Now we're fully cached. And once we get past this mark, we should be able to load the whole thing into... There we go. It's all cached in now. I'm going to go into up our resolution. Now, one thing to keep in mind here is that our video is actually longer than this, okay? So the total length of our video is much longer. For my demonstration, we're going to keep it at the 250 frames. You could always do more. You can add more, you can lengthen it out, and the way you do that is just to simply take your end frame and move it farther. If you want to find out where your end frame really is, use the scrub here and scrub way out farther. So the end of my video is actually all the way out here. There we go. At 707. And I think for mine, I'm actually going to keep it at 707, but I'm going to start at like 300 and just see what that does. Okay, let's let it cache. So we'd start there. trying to let it cache here real quick. Oh, I'm gonna need to add some more if I'm gonna do that. Okay. Actually, you know what? I changed my mind. Let's just put this back to 250 just for simplicity's sake. Okay, so again, we're gonna need to cache this back up. You can see wherever I stop at, it's gonna try to cache. Okay, so we're gonna need tracks that show us where the ground is, and then we'll also need tracks to show us where some vertical space is, which will be helpful. Okay, there we are. So we've cached it all in. We're all good to go. This is going to help out a lot. If you're having a hard time caching everything, you can actually export the entire video as a series of images and then re-import those images. It's a little bit quicker that way. The other thing is you don't have to cache it. Caching just helps it to speed the process up a little bit. Okay, so let's place our first track. We're going to track, for beginners, let's track this one right here. So we're going to hold down the control button and click on it, or go over to our little sidebar here and do marker add. Okay, now let's see. Then when we add, when we click, it's going to position it wherever we clicked at. Okay. Now, it can be a little hard to position this exactly where we want, so get it in the ballpark, and then look over here in this little track window. We've got a little representation of what it sees, and we're going to center that over there. Just like in the edit, in the main viewers, if you hold down the shift button, you move slowly, which is nice. You can get it centered right on there. Let's scale it up just a little bit. The larger you scale this, the bigger of an image it's taking to look for. So what it's doing is it's going to look for this every single frame. And so if we make this larger, it now is looking for all of this, which makes it a little bit more sturdy, but also takes longer to track. So keep that in mind. Now we have some filters. So if we take off R, G, or B, we're only getting the red, green, or the blue channel. So only the red colors, only the green colors, or only the blue colors represented as black and white. So see how that's there? Okay, so this is just red, that's just green, that's just blue. And if we even just look at this normally, you can see there's a lot of red colors there. So we're probably going to go with the red here. We might add in the green or maybe the blue there to kind of give it some extra contrast. High contrast is what we're looking for. We want something that's white against something black, or something, you know, one color against another color. That's why I chose to make these little paper balls to use. Okay, I just took a little piece of paper, ripped them up, and wadded them up there. Okay, now comes the fun part. For our tracking preset over here, we're just going to do default. It's not going to be a big deal. If you're really going fast or doing something different, you can change that, but this is fine for now. The rest of the settings don't worry about. Scroll down. Oops, track. Scroll down. And here we have a track little menu here. So there's a track with a play button and then a little play with a line. That's important. This play with the line means it'll only solve one frame. So if you click it, boop, you get a little dot there. And if we do click that a couple more times, you'll see it start to track the video. See how that's tracking? We get a red tail. And then if we use our arrow keys to step forward and backwards, you see we get a blue tail in front of us and a red tail behind us. Okay. Now you probably notice something different as well. If you look down here in the bottom, now we have this yellow underneath. That yellow means that it's solved for that section. Okay. And that's important. Now, we could just keep doing that on and on and on and on, but it gets kind of annoying. So what we're going to do instead is we're just going to click this play button here, and it's going to track until it loses track of it. Okay. Oop. And we're done. Now you can see how quickly that went because we've already cached the video. But it's already tracked that marker for the entire length of the video here. So let's go back and press play and we'll watch it. So you can see that blue line leads out in front of it, and the red line trails behind it. It's just a visualizer so that you can kind of see the path of where things are going. And you'll see some similarities between them as it goes. Okay, great. So now what we can do, we can move on to another track. And this one we're going to change it. We're going to do a little bit tricky. We're going to left click, hold down control and left click to place one. Scale it out, position in the middle, select there. Okay. And now we're also going to create one for this guy. There we go. Also, if you hit the F key, I forgot to tell this, it'll zoom this perfectly to fit. So whether you're zoomed in or zoomed out, it'll fit it, which is nice, so you don't get lost on the screen there. Okay, we're going to select both of these by holding down Shift and right-clicking on this one. And we'll click play. And now they're both going to track. Now, okay, here's what happened in this one. You see how this one has a red outline? That means it wasn't able to track successfully. It means that it lost track of where that little piece of paper was. So a good measure of practice is to go back a frame or two. Okay, so this is one thing. When you're doing multiple tracks, it will go until they both fail. So in other words, this one failed long before this one did, but it didn't do anything. Here we are. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go forward, and we're going to move this one manually by pressing G, just like you would in object mode. Maybe even scale it out a little bit. And then let's select these again, and we're just going to kind of step through one by one by one for a few minutes here to make sure that we've got it all. Okay, so there you can see this one we lost. Let's make sure it's on there again. Select them both, and we're going to step through again. Okay, now we'll go ahead and speed through. And it looks like we finished it out. So let's go back to the beginning and watch these. And you can see how they're staying on their marks there, and they each have similar blue and red tails. An interesting little fact here, the difference between those is how it's able to calculate the angle and the movement of the camera. Okay, so that's interesting. Okay, one thing that I just forgot about that you should always do is make sure you set your frame rate on your video to be the same as the frame rate of the video taken. In my case, it's that 29.97. So I'm actually going to select that. It shouldn't change your tracks, but it will speed up the video just a little bit. Okay. So now we've got those guys marked out. Let's go ahead and do these last two that are on the ground. Let's zoom out. And track. That one made it. Sometimes you'll have tracks that will be pretty tough. Meaning that they really don't want, there's not a lot of contrast, and you're going to have to baby this thing through the whole way to make sure it stays on there. And that's okay if you do. It's just, sometimes it just takes more time. This one's going pretty smoothly, but since we have a high contrast setup. Okay, and the other thing too is just to kind of eyeball and make sure that they're all staying on their target, because if they move, you're going to have some errors in your solving. Okay, for our last couple now, we're actually going to use this Pocky little guy here for our little information. So we're going to click one on the corner here. I'm feeling like red's going to be a pretty good channel to use. Blue's kind of nice there. We'll use, again, as much contrast as we can get. So we'll do that and see what happens. Alright, and begin solving. Alright, made it no problem. I'm watching through and it looks like everything's fine on there. Brilliant. Okay. Now, let's do one up here in this corner. Again, remember, we're trying to get as much dimensional information in here as we can. That's really important to have. Okay, we'll let that guy go. Okay, now we had something here I just saw. It's called drifting. You see how it does that? It rides up and down that aisle, up and down the side. Watch over here in this corner. Remember, this is what it's seeing, and as we step through, you'll start to see it looks very similar, very similar. Now it's down too far. I don't know if you can see that or not. It's down too far, but it still looks almost exactly the same as its last frame there. So you can see how the computer would think that. It tracks that position pretty well, and then all of a sudden it just starts riding down the side here, and you can see how those are all similar, and it's able to make its way all the way down to the bottom of the box and all the way back up again. And then kind of sticks there. So it actually found its way back, which is good, but that just means that there's a point where we're going to have to chop out a bunch of it. So here's how we're going to do that. Right before it leaves its position, right before it leaves its mark, so it stays there through here, and it leaves, we got to watch for it. Boop, there it is. Okay, so what we're going to do now, okay, so we're going to run forward. We're fine. That's fine there. Okay, so we're going to grab this next frame. We're going to manually move it into place. And now we're going to just do this solve next. Okay, what that's going to do is it's just going to solve the next one and overwrite what was there before. So you see how we've corrected the problem now. We're just going to baby it through one frame at a time just to make sure everything follows like it's supposed to. We should start seeing those. Yep, there we go. And the reason we're doing it one at a time is because if it jumped off once, it's likely to do it again. Now you can see here we're starting to get back to our original track. And if you remember right, we actually got back to our start location. So on one of these frames, we should see that this lines up perfectly again with where it was. And that's when we know we've gone far enough. We're getting close now. There we are. So now we are back in our track. We're back good to go again. And again. So now we've solved that one out, so it's fixed up. And again, sometimes, depending on which video you're doing, you may have to do quite a few of those runs to make sure you get everything patched in there. Okay. One last thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do this corner over here, and I'll explain why when we get to it. There we go. Let's go ahead and let this one track. I feel like this one's probably going to track successfully because it's not that complex. It's got a lot of contrast there, the color. Okay, so now we're going to try to make a scene out of this. I'm not 100% sure it's going to work because we don't have a lot of tracking points, and as you guys know, I like to kind of do this with you guys so you kind of see the process of how to fix this up if something goes wrong. So this is all our first shot. Also up here, just as an interesting little thing, these are the differences between the different pieces. So it's very interesting. You see there's very little movement through these areas, and then all of a sudden there's movement. So I'm not exactly sure what the colors represent there. I'm guessing the X and Y locations as it's estimating. It's interesting though, that's for sure. Okay. So last thing we're going to want to do is just kind of verify pressing Alt-A again to make this play. We're just going to make sure that there's nothing too crazy about any of these. They look fine to me. Okay, so now we're going to go down to this Solve tab right here. We're not on a tripod, so we're not going to mark that. If we had a tripod, it would actually make the solving a lot easier. So that's fine there. For Refine, we're going to do K1, K2. To be entirely honest, I'm not 100% positive how that works. I think it's just an algorithm that it uses to counteract some effects of the camera so that it can solve the motion better. The other thing we can do, if you come over here and we go to camera, you can see there's different presets for different types of cameras. So a Nexus 5, they probably have an iPhone in here. Yeah, the iPhone up to the 5, Galaxy S4, Galaxy S3, all these different phones. So if you have one of those phones, you can use that and it'll automatically have all your settings for you. Otherwise, you're going to want to go online if you can and choose your sensor width, aspect ratio, optical center, if you can find them. Honestly, from what I've seen, I shot this on the Moto X Pure, the 2015 one, and the width on that I think is 30 or close to 35. So I'm going to leave it at 35 and see what happens. Okay. And then again, if you have a special lens with a focal length, you can actually choose that. Or I'm sorry, no, the focal length was 20. See, I don't even know what I'm talking about. I think it was 23. We're just going to leave it the way it is for now and see what happens. Obviously, if you're doing this for like a movie or something professional, you really want to know all that information so that you can get the best track. But that's okay for now. Alright, we're going to go ahead and hit Solve Motion. And we have down here Solve Error 1.1375. The lower that solve error, the better. And the more stable your tracking points are, and the more of them that there are, the more the lower of a number you're going to get. Really below 1 is perfect, or is good. That's what you want. That's what the video that I had for most of the track was below 1. So in our case, we're going to take it what it is. It's fine. Just keep that in mind. Now we need to set where the floor is. And before we do this, actually, let's go down and do Setup Tracking Scene. And you notice our world over here changes. And if we click 0 to go to the camera, we're actually going to see our video back there. And if we press play, Alt-A, we can actually see, I'm going to put this in full screen so we can actually see that. You can actually see our little video playing in the background there. Right, and we're already starting to get some motion. It knows where those tracker points are, and it's actually created them in the 3D world. So it's already starting to put together the different pieces here. That's an important thing. Now you can see, though, it's not quite translated to the world correctly yet, but it's getting an idea there. Okay. There we go. So now what we need to do is we need to tell it which pieces are the floor. And we're going to do that by selecting 3 bundles. Each one of these is considered a bundle. I'm not sure why they call it that, but they do. We're just going to select 3, kind of a triangle there. We're going to click this floor button. And you see our world here totally changes. And so what it's done now is it knows that those 3 are on the floor. Now it's able to change the math, and so you can start to see we've got a lot of these tracking points now matching up with our actual ground here. So if we start to play the game, or play the video, you can see that the ground here is moving with the ground there. You can see what we're getting, and there are points here lining up with the video still, which is good. I'm going to actually change this up a little bit here. Just bear with me here for a second. We're going to split that and then split it out again this way. This one will be from the camera view, and this one will be from the top. Okay, so I'm going to actually take this cube here and move it somewhere in the scene. Let's put it right over here. And now we can kind of start to see how, as we move through the scene, how it's actually already starting to kind of follow there. It's pretty clever there. It's doing a pretty good job, I gotta say. Okay, so here we go. Make sure we got that cached in. Now what we're going to do is we're going to set an axis. Okay, you can actually stop here if you want. You don't really have to do anything else, but it is helpful. We're going to select these two. I'm sorry, actually we're going to select this piece right here, and we're going to say set origin. And you can see now the whole scene has originated around this point. We're going to click on this guy, and we're going to actually say set y-axis. So what that means is that from the origin to this point is the y-axis. And you can see now the bottom of our Pocky there is lined up perfectly with the y-axis. And so if we move something on the y-axis, there it is. On the x, there it is. And so we should be able to match more or less the Pocky. That's kind of a test that I do to make sure that everything's dialed in correctly, is to see if you can match the shape of this. So what we'll do is we'll move this back to that origin. Take that out to the edge, take our backside to there, and take this up to the edge of the Pocky. And then now we can look at our 3D world, and we've recreated it based on the image there, which is good. Okay, so now what's the next step? Well, we've basically tracked out our scene. The tough part is done now. All we have to do at this point is add something to the scene and work on a little bit of realism to kind of make things look right. So we're going to go ahead and switch back to default because it's just the easiest one to deal with. And in typical Blender fashion, the only thing we know how to add is Suzanne. So let's go ahead and add a Suzanne in here. So Shift A, Mesh, Monkey. We're going to pull this back, and we're going to scale it down. Now, this is important to kind of go outside of your main view here, because remember, this floor level here is the ground, so you want to have this kind of hovering above the ground. You won't really be able to tell, like, here is it closer or is it just down, but that perspective difference is going to make a difference. Let's put her about like that. And let's go ahead and try taking a render real quick. You can see it renders that out, and it should then throw the background in as well. Okay, there we are. Ooh, it looks amazing. Now, without motion, this is kind of, it doesn't do a whole lot for us. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at, first off, get rid of this plane on the second level here. It gets annoying. They tried to make it so you could do some backgroundy stuff. I would suggest, if you're really going to be serious about this, do your own compositing on there. But we're going to create a plane at the origin and just scale it up, you know, a fair amount. And this is going to be our shadow plane. Now, I'm sure you can do all this in Cycles. Right now I'm using Blender Internal Render for a couple reasons. One, the ambient occlusion is a little prettier, although technically Cycles doesn't need ambient occlusion. I like it for the look that it gives, and it's also what I'm most familiar with right now. I'm still learning a lot about Cycles. I like it for realistic rendering, but when you're trying to do certain sort of visual effects like we're about to do, sometimes Blender Internal is a little bit more easy to work with. And again, there's 100 ways you can do this. This is just the way that I've done it so far. So now we're going to select our monkey head here. Let's go ahead and apply a material to it. We're going to just turn down the specularity because we're not going to need it. Call this one monkey. Give it a nice bluish texture there. Looks kind of nice. And then for our plane here, we're going to call this one shadow. And here's why. We're going to go down, we're going to go to shadow, and we're going to select shadows only. So what this is in other words, this is only going to render out a shadow. So I'll give you an example here that'll help us out a little bit. If, zoom back out, we're going to get rid of this light. Okay, let's try taking a render real quick, see what we get. Okay, I forgot it turns on, when you have it set up the scene, it actually turns on your ambient occlusion for you, which is kind of nice, but we're actually going to turn that off and turn environmental lighting off for a minute. Make sure we're not getting anything. Okay, good. Now we're going to add a point light. So right up over here. And we should raise shadow. Okay, you can see there now our plane is only rendering the shadow. It's not actually rendering itself, which is important for what we're doing. You can see there it's rendered a shadow onto the table. Now, you can see by where everything else is, that's not the correct position for a shadow. We have a way of cheating that. Again, if you're doing this professionally, you really should be paying attention to where the shadows are coming from. Maybe make a map of where the room light is coming from, and that'll help you out a lot. In our case, right now, again, we're just going to cheat it because we're cheap and we want to be quick. So what we're going to do is we're just going to turn on ambient occlusion again. Factor of 1. And instead of multiply, we're going to do add. Let's go ahead and take a render there. And you can see we get a little halo of shadow underneath Suzanne there, which is nice. Once it's finished rendering out, there we are. So, okay, so we've got Suzanne there now. Let's go ahead, and what we're going to do now is we're just going to take a quick render. If we take our size here down to 25%, let's see what our render time there is. Okay, not very much at all. That's good. We can take renders in different images here. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and output these as raw TGAs just because they're easier to deal with. Let's turn our anti-aliasing down a little bit to make it a little quicker and just have it animate through for a little bit. So we're going to let it render out some images. A couple of things that would make this more realistic and something you can think about. Specifically if you go into cycles, you're using one of those. Again, pay attention to where the lighting sources are and try to recreate the lighting in the room because that's really going to sell it. The biggest drawback that I have with inserting fake or non-real images into video like this is just trying to get the lighting to match. You know, you can recreate some of the layouts so you can have something crawl over a keyboard or crawl up the side of a building. You know, you can do all that. Honestly, the tricky part is getting the lighting to look right because that has so much to do with it. The reason that we're using ambient occlusion is because it just gives the feel that this thing is very dull, that there's not very much to it, that it's just like it's been sandblasted or something. It's you know, a very matte finish, which means that your brain kind of covers up the fact that there's no real lighting information on it, not very much anyway. You know, ambient occlusion works very nicely in situations where you have a lot of light from different directions. So maybe that's outdoors or in a well-lit like studio environment. In a location like this where I'm just in my office with the overhead lights, it doesn't work quite so well. So, okay, we're getting up to close to about 100. We're going to stop at 100 here when it's finished, 100. And there we go. Okay. If you go to render and play, rendered animation, we should get our video so far. So there you can see we've got our motion working pretty well there. A little stutter every now and again. Again, that's due to the fact that we don't have very many track points. The more you can add, the better. This was just sort of I wanted to get something together so you guys could see how it works. You can see our little monkey here is occluding the piece over there. That's the other thing too. The more things you can have come behind and go in front of your character, the more realistic it's going to look. And you know that is a little tricky to then to do masking and all that, but that's another thing for another day, perhaps. So hopefully this gave you guys an idea of how to go this direction. Oh, one thing I was going to show you, one last thing. The way that I did the animation with the guy with the thing looking at the character, I simply grabbed the I had a skeletal animation put together, or skeletal skeleton, a bone structure put together, and then took the root, or I'm sorry, the bone connected to the head, clicked on it, right-clicked on it, just like I'm doing with this object, right-clicked, and held shift on the camera, and then pressed, make sure we just get those two. What in the world? No, I just want the camera. Okay, I guess those two are the same. Whatever. And then we did Control T, which is to make a track, and we're going to say track to constraint. Now, whenever the camera moves, it's going to follow the camera. It's going to face the camera. Now, it's kind of the wrong way, so what we can do here, if we go into our constraints, we can play around with the direction. There we go, -Y. Or we could always rotate the model around too. That would work as well. So now whenever we move the camera, you can see there, even if we manually move it around. It's following us and looking at us. And then what I did to make it look a little bit more kind of somewhat realistic, if you go into the object data on Suzanne, I think it's under Suzanne anyway, and you go to Relations Extra, Slow Parent, no, it must be the camera you do that to. Let me try this again here, make sure I'm not just telling you wrong. Well, I was able to use slow parent, which is basically it delays when the thing looks at you. I'm a little bit confused as to why it's not doing that, but that's okay. Let's try. Yeah, it should just be track to negative with an up of Z. World space to world space. Well, anyway, you get the idea. So when you do that, now it's going to track with you. And I just did that to the bone in the character's body. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this. And of course, you can do anything now in this scene as long as it's within the, you know, as long as it makes sense in the scene there. And track along with it and impress all your friends. So thank you guys for watching, and let me know if there's anything else you want. See you.